So good morning. Welcome to this webinar on the added value of digital technologies in supply chain. Before we start, I would like to share a few logistics aspects to the webinar with you. The first one is questions. You can ask questions during this webinar, but your microphone is muted, so you cannot ask them through the microphone. In the webinar window, you have the GoToWebinar window. You will see a box called questions. If you fill in your questions there, we will pick them up and then I will ask them either during the webinar or at the end of the webinar. I'll keep some time to treat the different questions that you will have put in the questions box. So that's the first aspect. Second, if you want a copy of the presentation, just drop Nik or myself an email at the end, and we will forward it to you. And then lastly, when you log off of this webinar, you will see a window with a survey that's just a very limited number of questions that help us to make our webinars better and more in line with your expectations. So if you could just take a couple of minutes at the end of the webinar to tell us what you thought about it, that would be really nice, right? With that, I think we can get into the subject. And for the subject of today, I'm happy to have Nik Delmeire next to me. I'll let you present yourself, maybe, Nik. That will be the best way.
Good morning to everybody. My name is Nik Delmeire. If I look a bit tired, well, it's due to the tough football game of yesterday night where the Japanese made us play very hard and support the Belgian team very hard. I work for an association called the European Shippers Council. What do? We represent the interests of the shippers or the cargo owners or the supply chain owners with all that is related to improving the supply chain. So basically a lobby association, and maybe you can show one slide showing a bit in which field you are active. So initially it was all about policy and regulation that we try to influence from a supply chain from a shipper's perspective. But along the way, we saw that innovation became more and more important. And when there is innovation, all of a sudden policy and regulation probably needs to be changed as well. And of course, last but not least, there's the market. And as you can see, the way we've been drawing it, market, innovation, policy and regulation are heavily connected. And this model is often referred to as a triple helix model, where the innovation, policy and regulation market go hand in hand in order to improve what needs to be improved in a balanced way. So digital, which is a big topic in supply chain these days, and it's digital is disruptive and so on, is right in the middle of these three key domains. And there you can situate the core project as well.
Okay, great. And can you maybe explain to the people who join what the core project was exactly and what were its objectives?
Well, the big goal or the holy grail, if I may ask, was to make sure that the supply chains of the cargo owners, of the supply chain owners, became more effective, more efficient, so meaning of a higher quality, gaining speed, better, more compliant than it was ever before. That's objective number one. The second objective was indeed that all the law enforcement bodies that are around, or the authorities, were able to make sure that they could do the necessary work in order to see that these supply chains are indeed compliant. And third of all, of course, both parties or both stakeholders have to be provided with the necessary tools to be able to reach those common objectives. So that's in a nutshell. It's a 4-year project. It's about to end now. In total budget 50 million euro, of which 30 million is covered by the European Commission. Who are the stakeholders representing the Commission? Well, there's DG Home, focusing on security matters. DG TaxUd, which is representing the tax authorities from European level, at European level, and the third one is DG Move, and Move is the Directorate General who takes care of all what is transport related. It's about 70 partners, I think I said that. There are about 22 sub-projects in there, or were in there, of which half of it were research driven and the other half demo driven. So that's in a nutshell, and the objective and the background of the core project.
Yeah, 50 million of investments. That's a huge investment, eh?
It's I've been told the biggest supply chain project ever funded by the European Commission.
No, that's impressive. I think the first question I noted, of course, if you think there are other results that you should highlight, we can definitely do that. Was a lot of the work that has been done in the core project, if I have well understood, is about data pipelines. Yeah? With the research that has been done and the demos that have been built, can you indicate what the added value of those data pipelines is for a shipper or for a supply chain?
The data pipeline, let me start from a shipper's perspective. I think those are a bit involved in supply chain, or not even in supply chain, know that most of the companies, be it big ones or smaller ones, they all have been investing in let's say digitalizing their own house, so to speak. So I'm around since 1985, and there I saw MRPs coming up, purchasing systems, and so on and so on. So in the end, what we see now is that most of the companies have an ERP, enterprise. What is it?
Enterprise
resource planning. So all what's happening within the company is digitalized. The company I used to work for, if I wanted to see what kind of stocks were available in Argentina, I could do so. I did not even have to print it on paper. I just put on the screen and I could see it. But the moment we were shipping containers, boxes, pallets, we lost contact with the world, so to speak, kind of a black hole. No more digital connections anymore with most of the partners in the supply chain. So from a shipper's perspective, it was only logical that there would be an extension of an ERP. So a data pipeline connecting all the partners in the supply chain would be helpful. And all the partners would be your freight forwarders, your customers, all kinds of services that you find useful or not useful, but also the authorities, be it customs, phytosanitary, Interpol, whatever you, all those should be connected. And the second condition is that data are shipped before the goods are shipped, so to speak. Don't know exactly how to say it in English, but data are coming before goods arrive at the next stakeholder in the supply chain. That was the whole setup, and over the different demos we have been, or pilot project that have we been doing, it proved to be successful. Of course, freight forwarders have their own motivation to invest in data pipelines and authorities as well, but let's focus on the shipper's perspective.
Can you maybe give an example or examples of how those projects show the data pipeline? what that's?
Well, interesting enough, if you would go through all the different sub-projects that were done, is that data, we have a data pipeline that's set up by shippers. We have data pipeline and they connect all their other parties to it. There is data pipeline set up by freight forwarders, and they have all their partners connected. There's one, and that's the most famous one because it got to the press an awful lot of time. One set up by a carrier, the so-called Maersk GTD pipeline. We have one set up by an inland port, which is called Interporto Bologna. So we see that the idea of taking up data pipelines is widely spread, but the goal is the same everywhere: connect all the parties in the supply chain in order to make the supply chain faster, more reliable, more compliant.
Yeah, and that was my next question. If you get to the data pipeline, the way I understand what you were saying is, many years ago, when I wanted to see the status of a shipment or the status of goods in my own factory, I could just look into the ERP, right? Once I get outside of my own environment and I have other trade partners, I don't see anything anymore, right? With those pipelines, I build a system that allows me to have the same kind of visibility outside my company as inside my company. Is that then a real-time visibility?
It depends on how you set it up. There are different philosophies, and we have been discussing this on some of the sub-projects. Would it be a real-time one where the data is really pushed, so to speak, every minute to those parties that are interested in getting this information, or is it more kind of real-time on demand, where those parties involved pick up the data when they feel like picking up the data? So this is an ongoing discussion, probably an endless discussion. Depending on the needs, people will go for one of the solutions. A nice example is a sub-project where it's about dangerous goods, shipping dangerous goods across Europe, either by rail wagons or tank trailers on a truck, where based on sensors put on the let's say on the tank wagons or on the tanks, that let's say the commercial parties in the supply chain, being the service providers and the shippers or the freight forwarders, would be happy with getting the information every 6 hours just to know where the truck is, but where authorities would like to have the road inspection then. In this case, they would like to get the information like every 5 minutes online. Why do they want this way? Because they have to make sure that traffic on the road is safe. When, for example, there's a big traffic jam and they could see trucks with very dangerous goods coming, they would like to know what's happening, so that they can, when needed, divert the wagons or the trucks, or take the necessary precautions to avoid dangerous situations. So you see, there's a whole menu, and people try to pick from the menu whatever they feel useful. That's the way it's been set up.
Yeah. What I also find interesting, I think, in the idea of the data pipeline is the fact that if I try to make a comparison, maybe it's a question for you. If you compare, I think companies have tried for many years already to connect to each other, right? I mean, EDI is around for a very long time. What is the difference between that data pipeline concept and the old EDI concept? Is there a difference?
That's a difficult one. I think in these days of EDI messages, this was also, in my perception, it was mostly a one-to-one kind of situation where either the shipper or the service provider says, well, I have an idea to speed up your connection with me as a service provider, or the other way around. I have an idea, let's use EDI. Where now I feel that it's more like a common interest, where you know on beforehand that if you propose the concept of the data pipeline, you know on beforehand that more than one service can be connected, and that the link with, for example, customs authorities is easier to be made, and where you can have more access to the transport documents that you need along the way, and so on and so on. So the scope is much broader than what it was before.
Yeah. I found a very nice example. Let's see if I can quickly find it back from the IBM Maersk case. Well, that was it. Yeah. It's one of those examples they communicated on, right? Saying,
yes.
If you look at the shipment of avocados from Mombasa to Rotterdam,
yes.
You do one shipment of avocados.
Yes.
You need 30 people.
Yes.
30 actors, 100 people, and 200 exchanges of information.
Yes.
Right. And for me, this opened a bit my eyes, because I was thinking, indeed, if you think in EDI, which is indeed, as you were saying, most of the time a point-to-point connection, right? If you have 30 actors and you have to build EDIs between 30 actors, you're spending your life building EDI, right?
Yes.
While if you go to a data pipeline where you have one platform that is used by all parties, and all 30 actors can put their data in the same pipeline, you get a much more efficient sharing of information, which is probably in a point-to-point far more difficult.
Yes,
right?
That's the whole idea. Yeah.
Which is of course a very nice.
What it doesn't show here on this, well, if you have, for those still on board, if you go to YouTube and you look for Maersk, then you will see little movies on this kind of processes. It's where one person, a Danish guy working for Maersk in those days, follows the trail of these avocados. It's a 2-3 minute movie, and exactly these topics are highlighted. But for example, what is not mentioned here on this slide, if you would look to the door transit time of these avocados, if I remember well, it was like 40 days. Half of it is waiting time. More or less half of it is waiting time. That is not even mentioned here.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, due to information exchanges, lack of papers or lack of papers. And there came Maersk's idea to build up this kind of data pipeline. They couldn't do it on their own. They involved, in this case, IBM in the whole setup.
Yeah.
But if you don't like to watch football, go to YouTube and look for Maersk. I'm not promoting Maersk here, just promoting the content of these little movies. Really interesting. Eye openers.
They're nice movies. That's for sure. Yeah, and we talked already a little bit about authorities, right? How did the authorities, and you mentioned a number of European entities participating to the project. How did they participate? What is their role? Why are they spending money and time on these initiatives?
Well, in this particular project, and I've been told that it started, or the concept was created already in 2011, 2012. The initiator, or let's say the spiritual father, if I may call it this way, was DG Home, what they call it right now. And within their portfolio of activities they have to do, or to take care of in Europe, is security. So securing, let's say, the borders, not just related to trafficking with people, but avoiding terrorism, avoiding fraud, and so on and so on. So from that step, the link with DG TaxSud Customs was quickly made. So basically more than let's say the pure transport, it was security and tax and customs that were initiating the project. So they saw a real benefit in setting this up. In terms of the project itself, we saw participation of the World Customs Organization, Interpol, but Interpol soon disappeared. They got their work subcontracted to a private kind of company that took care of it. But who remains the longest were a number of customs authorities representing different member states. And the most active one is the Dutch customs. And they really were very forceful in promoting these data pipelines, and they have been showing big interest in connecting their information systems to the different data pipelines that have been developed.
And what do they do with those data?
What they try to do is try to anticipate. In that sense, if they get the data before the goods arrive, and they get the necessary data elements, all the necessary and even a bit more necessary data elements, of course, they can plan their operations better. First, they can, that's first. Secondly, they can detect in a more relaxed way and in a more structured way the dangerous flows, dangerous from a customs perspective then. So they can allocate their control or the inspection resources more easily, let's say on the bad guys or girls, on one hand, and secondly, it's easier to grant trusted trade lanes or green lanes to those people or companies in the supply chain that behave better than any others. So this is for their own perspective. If they can, from their own perspective, it's also to the benefit to the shippers and the forwarders, because if the customs can plan their work better, if they can select the targets better, they make the supply chains by definitions faster for those that behave better and that are connected to these data pipelines. They also see, but I'm talking on behalf of Dutch customs now. For those that are a bit involved or knowledgeable about customs procedures or customs strategy, let's say, TaxSud has been developing a system called ICS2, Import Control Systems version 2. Without going too much into detail there, the responsibility of providing customs with the right data is in the hands of the carriers. Carriers have to make sure that they provide the customs, that they get the right data from all the other parties in the supply chain, and they have to provide customs with the necessary data. But the link between the carriers and customs is only limited to, so first of all, carriers have big responsibility, and if it doesn't work, they are accountable. And second, it's only limited to 50 or 60 data elements. If ICS2 would be replaced by more like a data pipeline concept, the carriers would be made less responsible, but the big responsibility would be shifting to the shippers on one hand, and secondly, the customs would have access to much more data elements than needed currently, and this would allow, if shippers would be willing to provide these extra elements, customs could do their work even better than what they had in mind with ICS2.
Yeah. And as you were saying, the shippers win from that because, as you mentioned, by providing that information in a reliable way, they could get into a trusted trade lane more quickly. So having shorter customs procedures, more predictability, and especially even if they would not be, the whole procedure of will my container be controlled, etc., would become more predictable in such a way that as a shipper you don't have to count for an uncertain period to get your goods cleared, but a very predictable process where you know when goods will arrive, whether there would be a customs control or not, and then when you would get your goods available.
The best example from the top of my head is in the what we call Flora Holland demonstrator. So Flora Holland is a big auction in the Netherlands for flowers, and if you would buy roses, I think here in the Benelux most of them come out of Kenya and not from somewhere in the Netherlands. The supply chain has to be very short when they come from Kenya into the shops, knowing that in some Dutch flower shops, if you buy flowers and they die, within 7 days you can go back and get some fresh ones for free. So for Flora Holland is of key importance to have a fast supply chain. So by setting up their data pipelines and showing to Dutch customs that they were a good partners, good and reliable or a trusted partner, they managed to get rulings or arrangements with Dutch customs that clearance is partly done in the air. So not when the flowers are on the tarmac, but already when the plane is still in the air. Not only that, but they also managed to get an agreement with customs that the phytosanitary inspections, if any, and the customs inspections could be done at the same time. So in parallel and not any longer in sequence and in the air. So you can imagine that it's an enormous savings for this Flora Holland supply chain.
Yeah. Looking further to the authorities, how do you think the authorities, because I understand why they participate to the project, to setting this up. Now the project is, as you said, almost at its end. How do you think the authorities will take it now? What will be their role in the future for these data pipelines?
There's a number of different things here. What we saw happening in the project during the lifetime of the project was that the Dutch customs is at the forefront. They lead the pack in terms of modernizing the customs procedures, let's say, or customs digitalization. After DigiTaxud themselves, Taxud is really promoting digitalization, maybe not necessarily by data pipelines, but with their oldest, between bracket, all the systems, ICS2, but they are clearly pushing digitalization in the supply chain. What we saw happening, apart from the Dutch and a little bit the Belgian customs, all the other member states were rather passive in joining the project, or at least showing active interest. Only when we started to tell about what the Dutch customs have been doing to the different member states, and we did that during this core event that took place in April, we saw that the interest of the different other member states were higher than expected, or were finally picking up. So now we hope with further missionary work, mostly done by Dutch customs, I would think, and DigiTaxud, that the speed of applying this kind of data pipelines would get higher. But that's a role of, let's say, the customs authorities across Europe, and we can only support that. The other aspect is, let's say, the DG Move, so the Transport Directorate General, Ministry of Transport, so to speak, at European level. They have been picking up that idea a bit earlier in different fora. They started what's been called Digital Transport and Logistics Forum. That's not a project, it's a forum. It's where different associations could join. And they are promoting very heavily this data pipeline. And the ideas that came, or the core legacy, if I may say it, to call it that way, is clearly in there. Even to that extent, that digital pipelines, according to DTLF philosophy, should become easy, should become a commodity, should be easy accessible, should become plug and play, should not too long discuss about the standardization of the different data elements, but should we focus on making it work. In parallel to developing the work they would like to do on this data pipelines, they work also on making the documents, freight documents disappear, let's say, and make it data sets. And do away with the notion of e-freight documents, but making the jump from a kind of a quantum leap from paper documents to data sets. And as a result, or partly as a result of DTLF, there is already a legislative proposal, and the name escapes me now. But basically, it says that authorities across Europe should facilitate these data sets rather than paper transport documents. So within DG Move, let's say this data pipeline philosophy is taken up already 2-3 years ago.
Yeah. You mentioned it before, but maybe you can dive into it a little bit more. There's the Maersk initiative with their GTD pipeline.
Yes.
That's probably one of the more advanced projects, right? Is that correct?
Well, and I don't want to be negative at all about this Maersk and IBM initiative, is the one who got the most attention.
Okay.
Why? Because Maersk is, of course, an international carrier dealing with millions of containers, so to speak. So they get and they put a lot of money investment in there, also for making this public. But I have to say that some of the demonstrators or the pilot projects that we have been doing within the core project show the same kind of results and use the same kind of philosophy. Only the community that can make use of these kind of data pipelines are a lot smaller.
Yeah.
But these are not necessarily worse, on the contrary. So it's a matter of getting the interest, or buying not in a negative way, buying the interests of the supply chain community.
Yeah. And is that interest picking up? Do you see now that companies are jumping on the bandwagon of those initiatives, of those demo initiatives from the core project?
Probably it's a bit too soon, but if I hear the people in the project that are it depends. If we go back to Flora Holland, this is a shipper, so they will try to use it for their own sake and not sell it. So they will try to connect as many of their, what they call growers, in Kenya and across the world, probably to their own data pipeline, and try to connect as much freight forwarders to their data pipeline. And that's about it, to the benefit of their own supply chain, and make it useful for those connected to it. We have other demonstrators, a smaller freight forwarder called Seacon, a Dutch-based freight forwarder. He has been, or she have been, experimenting with expensive printing devices coming from Japan, or or Asia into the Netherlands. They will clearly sell it to the rest of their customers. And the results that we saw were promising. So it depends. And apart from that, if I look around in other communities away from core, there are data pipelines everywhere.
Yeah.
IATA, as for example, they have never been in the project, but it's a nice example to mention. Ericsson, known for data transmissions, have been using, but also a big shipper, have been using their let's say their knowledge or experience in transmitting data, also for transmitting supply chain data. And this whole idea is now being picked up by IATA and other associations in the supply chain community. So you see it happening everywhere. Another nice example are the port communities, like Antwerp, Hamburg, you name them, have already been building port community systems. Antwerp is taking it a bit further with their Next Trust initiative. But what we see also happening now is that the different port community systems are getting connected.
Yeah.
So also there, that a shipper does not have to, if he should want to, has to plug into the Antwerp port community system and to the Hamburg port community system, and so on. No, they will be able to connect up to one into one, and the rest will be done by the different port community systems. So it's taking momentum, and it will be more widespread.
Yeah. Because that was one of the questions I saw popping up. If you see those data pipelines developing, you see a lot of initiatives, you could indeed wonder as a shipper, will I need, say 3 years from now, will I need to connect to 50 different data pipelines in function of the fact that I'm shipping with one freight operator or with another one or with a port authority, etc. How do you think that will work?
If DTLF, so the initiative taken by the Commission, succeeds in their mission, then we will avoid that kind of situation, and then we could probably go to a situation like with your smartphone. Yeah. If today you want provider X, if today you have provider X and you want to switch to Y, you can easily do it in a couple of hours' time. That's the objective. And DTLF is an initiative taken by the Commission, but anyone who wants to participate and gets through the selection procedure will be able to participate in that forum. So it will be not just the Commission, the European Commission, who goes that way, but everybody who feels that this would be the future can join and push it in that direction.
Yeah.
So I'm confident that in a couple of years from now, it will really become a commodity and will be not kind of not anymore the unique selling proposal from one or another freight forwarder. It will be a common good. The way these freight forwarders will use it, and use it to the benefit of themselves and the whole community, that will be different. Yeah. But the principle itself will be a common good or a commodity.
Okay. Could you imagine that there is a Amazon-like tech giant that picks up the whole market and becomes inevitable? If it's if you don't want to make a guess on that, you're not obliged to.
I really don't have a clue. Huh? That's probably I don't know. Yeah. I don't really know how this will. It could be, but on the other side, there will be forces that will be working against it, and there will be probably a kind of a balance at the end.
Yeah, no, that's good. Good. There was a point that I noted when looking into these initiatives, and then specifically the one with Maersk and IBM. because we cannot do a webinar on a digital topic without talking about blockchain, right?
Yes.
That would not be
yes.
Right. And this the platform, the Maersk platform, is a blockchain, uses the blockchain technology. And looking into it, I think this is now an extremely nice example of where the real added value of a blockchain comes, right? Because you have, on the one hand, you have a distributed system by nature. You have many actors who have to bring in information, right? Shipments. I mean, the blockchain is a ledger-based system, so you have a transaction, and you add an element, and you add another element, and you add another element, and that's exactly what happens with shipments. Correct.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, if you do a shipment, I mean, you have a container, and then you put data stuff in it, and then you ship it, and then it goes somewhere, and we add a document, and each of those things is a perfect addition to a ledger, right?
Yes,
until the
exactly.
moment.
Yeah.
So the blockchain that is a ledger system is perfectly perfectly designed for this kind of transactions. And if then you add a logic, a cryptographic logic that assures that every addition that is done to the ledger is secured by the entire system, so that you cannot, or that it becomes, in the current state of the art, almost impossible to make false entries into the ledger. It's a really beautiful solution to secure transactions, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Did you see any other of the projects that went into the blockchain technology?
Not that I'm aware of, but that can be me. Not focusing on that aspect. I was more interested in seeing the result of what could be done rather than on how they did it. To put it in a bit of a slogan, the only chain that counts for me is the supply chain, not the blockchain. So how they did it, I couldn't, so to speak, I couldn't care too much about it, as long as what need to be demonstrated was demonstrated, and it happened. Blockchain, as you already heard, or as you can read between the lines, I don't follow it in detail. As ESC, we are also involved in an electronic European technology platform called ALICE. Interesting to have a look at it. It looks at how supply chains and logistics could look like in 2030, 2050. So zero emission, kind of not zero emission as an objective by means of what they call the physical internet. So in that platform are already a number of renowned professors involved, and they regularly talk about blockchain. Is it still a hype? Is it still blockchain, one version of blockchain? And there people start telling blockchain there's no longer one version. There are different kind of versions of it. One more an open system, one more a closed system. And if we go for a closed system, then we are back to square one. And there are other solutions waiting around the corner to jump in already. So it's still for me, still kind of messy. We tried, and not Argentinian messy, but like in a mess. So
there's a football again.
still football in my mind. So it remains to be seen. And yes, IBM, Maersk use blockchain to show what they can show, but on the other hand, if you would go to the Maersk IBM solution, you will still see that a lot of it is paper driven. It's PDFs.
Okay. So
although it's blockchain, they could probably take it, and they will take it one step further and work with data sets rather than with scanned documents.
Yeah, logical.
So it's
makes sense. I see already a couple of questions coming in. Maybe just before we go to the questions of the audience, if you would summarize in a couple of sentences the main learning point of the core project for a shipper. What should all shippers know about the results of the core project?
Well, if as a shipper you look at your supply chain or the cost of your supply chain, there are a number of elements. First, there are your operational costs because of failed shipments, because you have to monitor your shipments, you have to contact your freight forwarders and so on. If you want to reduce those, the data pipeline concept has been shown by Core could help you in reducing those costs. If you look at the other part of the supply chain costs, which is the inventory levels and the cost involved with that, well, Core has a number of tools that could help you with that. Also, because in Core are a number of examples and tools that would help you in taking the risk out, in increasing the safety or the security, in reducing the lead times of your supply chain. So if you add up these kind of elements, you definitely can reduce your inventory level. So you could win on the administration, you can win on the operational costs, you can win on reducing your inventory, and you can find some tools that make your supply chain more compliant or more easily compliant. And if you add up all these three elements, Core or the tools in Core are a winner.
Yeah.
But there's one thing every shipper or everyone in the supply chain has to keep in mind. If you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So there's a huge task for the shipper is to make sure that the data he or she has to provide the next one or the different ones in the supply chain have to be right at the first time. If you don't do that, you're still lost.
Yeah,
or not you, your goods are lost.
Yeah. Back to basics.
Back to basics, yes. As we have been told by the different customs authorities that were on stage during the lifetime of the project. Dear shippers, freight forwarders, if you don't get it right from the source, you can do whatever you want, nothing will help.
Right, good. I have a couple of questions that I want to share also with the group. The first one is saying, do you think the carriers attempt to integrate their supply chains like Maersk and CMA CGM would be good for their customers? Or on the contrary, as all the data would be kept in one organization, and I'll just state what is written here because I like it, or is it more like having too many eggs in one basket?
That question sounds very familiar. There's a danger of having, as a shipper or as a freight forward, having freight forwarder as opposed to carrier. There's indeed the dangers of putting too many eggs into one basket. So as shippers, and I think other parties in the supply chain, we will try to avoid that by setting up the right policies and setting up the right regulations. But that will take time. And if the person who has been asking the question has the Maersk IBM joint venture in mind, there I can tell you that this kind of joint venture is on the desks of DG Competition, in order to see if this kind of dangerous or risks are to see if there are not too much of these kind of risks or dangerous things are in those contracts. Maersk IBM is also looking at setting up kind of an advisory board or industry board that could be on board of one of the governing boards of the IBM Maersk consortium joint venture. So the question is valid. People have been asking what to do with it, and people are working on it to overcome this kind of risk.
Yeah. And the next question I have here is a bit in the same orientation. saying, can you comment on information formats and standards within and between the pipelines? Who defines the standard and the format in those pipelines? Is that an issue in those projects? Was that a challenge? Was that an issue? The standards and the formats?
As far as I could understand from the different projects or sub-project or demos in the whole project, it was not an issue since they came up with solutions. But maybe these solutions that I found are a bit too proprietary and would not or cannot be the solution for the whole, let's say, world. That's why, and I have to refer again to DTLF, there these kind of topics are on standardization of the different data elements, and if there is standardization, which kind of existing standards do we use is a hot topic, and will remain a hot topic. There is negotiations, discussions, debates between or exchanging learnings between bodies like GS1, like UNC-FACT, and all kinds of these institutional bodies in order to come to kind of a valid solution. But it will take time.
Yeah.
And it's work for specialists to be done. It's a bit, for me personally, it's a bit like the blockchain discussion. For me, it has to work in the most efficient way. And in the end result should be if I can switch from A to B overnight, then it's fine. But what's happening under the table, we are not following. I am not following, or ESC is not following that into much detail right now.
Okay. Yeah. Then I have a last one, which is a bit of a long one, so I have to go out of the camera to read it. It goes in the same direction.
Yes.
Okay. Saying there's 3 challenges to overcome digitization of the supply chain. First of all is interoperability, which we already discussed.
Yes.
Right. Secondly would be data protection.
Yes.
Right. And the third one would be incentives for innovation. Yeah? Because somehow you want the platform to continue, or you want those technologies to continue their innovation and improve, right? And the first question here is, the first one, does this make sense? I think we agree that those 3 objectives make sense. The next question is, which of the 3 is the most important? Which is a bit of a tricky question, of course. Thank you for that, if you're there.
He or she deserves a beer for the most complicated question on the list.
He's far away, it looks like. So, standardization, security, or innovation? What's the most important in this stage, according to you?
It's a bit like what I showed as a first slide. These things go hand in hand, and they have to be moved forward in the kind of the same speed. If there is more innovation or disruptive innovation, policy and regulation and standardization will have to follow. So they should not lose each other along the way. So, and I can see this happening in the European Commission is on one hand looking at policies and regulations to stimulate this kind of innovative solutions, and they involve the stakeholders. On the other hand, the European Commission puts a lot of money on the table to stimulate that innovation. They have different programs where they launch project calls, and where the industry or academics or a combination of all these other stakeholders in the supply chain can participate, write a proposal, get it approved, get it approved and get the money to innovate. So it's hard to tell what is most important. It has to go hand in hand, otherwise you end up with an unbalance, and then you start having discussions on who's responsible, who's not responsible when it's too late. So you need to do this upfront. To me, the more important ones, and it's not on the list, is the missionary work. Try to make people, supply chain managers, freight forwarders, make people aware that these kind of solutions exist. And this is to me the most difficult task, and this is the role of an association like ESC or an association representing the forwarders to make this kind of initiatives known. The big companies, you saw it in Maersk, IBM, Procter & Gamble, those participating in the pilot projects of Maersk and IBM, companies like Dow, they see it. But there's a lot of companies that still don't see the benefit, and they like to use the good old paper fashion, and they have to follow to get the momentum and to create a snowball effect of all these kind of innovations, and then it will settle, and then we are there where we want to be.
Yeah. Great. Well, we did a bit of that missionary work in the last,
of course, yes.
In the last hours. I think it's a wonderful conclusion for our webinar. So just thank you very much, Nik, for being here. It was a
pleasure.